Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is Glossy Philosophy. My name is Jansen Binman and today you are tuned in for a book talk. Let's just take a moment and congratulate ourselves on taking a journey with Thomas Cromwell through 3 books. Bring Up the Bodies is the last one that we are discussing about the Thomas Cromwell saga. However, this is not the last book in the trilogy. Yes, it is a trilogy. There is a 3rd book by Hilary Mantel that finishes it off, that goes from the point of Anne Boleyn's beheading to Jane Seymour and then into the next marriage, and then finishes off with Thomas Cromwell being beheaded. And the reason why I didn't put that as part of this series was when I was reading it, I just felt like Hilary Mantel lost her way a little bit in the character of Thomas Cromwell, and also just the storyline itself. The book felt like maybe it was a little bit too long, and it wasn't until the second half of the book when Thomas Cromwell basically gets arrested and taken to the Tower and then his end that I thought, this is amazing. But everything before that, like all Jane Seymour time, it felt like it was dragging on a little bit, and I also just felt really uncomfortable reading it because there's so much talk about things that we are not going to talk about on this channel. So, which is interesting because in Bring Up the Bodies, a lot of the same themes occur. However, I just feel like the writing is a little bit better and has a little bit more of a point to it, whereas in the 3rd book, I feel like, again, it kind of loses its way. Now, stepping back a little bit, I don't know historically how many letters we have from Thomas Cromwell after the beheading of Anne Boleyn. I don't know if that just gets really boring, because Thomas Cromwell, after the beheading of Anne Boleyn, rises even higher. He basically becomes like the King of England without becoming the king. He has so much power. He oversees so much, and he's getting things done and, doing a lot of good things, and also having to deal with a lot of Henry's not comfortable things, including his women. So I don't know how much historically Hilary Mantel had to work on, or if it was just like all law stuff that got maybe a little bit boring, and she felt like she couldn't really make a complete book out of that. So in her defense, I'm not really sure. Unfortunately, Hilary Mantel has passed away. So I am not able to email her or ask her questions, which I was planning on doing before this book talk, and I'm so sad that she is no longer with us. She was a fabulous writer, and yes, we are just going to kind of jump into it. I would highly recommend this book. If you have read Wolf Hall and you loved it, you will love this one even more. The writing is even better. The storyline is even better. And again, even though it's kind of dealing with some uncomfortable things and also the beheading of Anne Boleyn, it is just done beautifully, and I loved it. I think I love this one even more than Wolf Hall, because Wolf Hall was shocking and really got me into this crazy world of Henry VIII's court and Thomas Cromwell and who is this guy, which led me into the biography of Thomas Cromwell by Tracy Borman. And then kind of finishing it off with Bring Up the Bodies, it just like mind blown. So well done. So obviously recommend it, love it. So let's just kind of do a quick synopsis. Anne Boleyn has been queen for about 3 years. At the end of Wolf Hall, Henry VIII is already starting to look around, check out other women, have some mistresses, and his eyes, for whatever reason, fall on Jane Seymour. Now, historically, we don't know anything about Jane Seymour. There are only a few, factual things that have been written down about things that she said, but otherwise she stayed pretty quiet. So it's really hard to understand, who she was as a person, and Hilary Mantel writes her as kind of a stupid person, unfortunately. But again, we don't know if she was actually stupid, but somebody has to be the villain, which is Anne Boleyn, and somebody has to be kind of stupid, and that's Jane Seymour in this book. I don't know about in reality. So that's the end of Wolf Hall. Bring Up the Bodies is all about the downfall of Anne Boleyn. She was given Henry VIII, Elizabeth, the daughter, who will eventually become queen after a bunch of nonsense. And then she keeps trying to get pregnant. She gets pregnant and she loses her babies. And that is just heartbreaking. And even though a lot of the action happens like off stage in kind of a Greek style, and there's a lot of discussion about events that maybe we wouldn't actually want to see firsthand or partake in firsthand, which I greatly appreciate. Thank you. It is still heartbreaking, and even though her women, like the women that help her get dressed and all of the Queen's women, are really brutal about Anne and really brutal about how she handles the miscarriages, I just think Anne Boleyn must have been under an immense amount of pressure to not only get pregnant, but to also keep the child. So I just, the first time I read this, I was like just so blown away with how Anne Boleyn was being written about. I was just shocked that she was such a villain in the storyline. And historically, we don't really know, because when Henry VIII is done with you, he's done with you. He wants you wiped from the face of the earth. He doesn't want anything to remind him of you, probably because he feels a little bit bad for the crappiness that he's just dealt you. But so it's hard to really know, was she a villain in real life, or was she just a tragic figure in history? I mean, for sure she was tragic no matter what, but we don't know how villainy she was. The second time I read it, I really felt for her, and even when she wasn't putting her best foot forward, I just felt so awful for her. And there were only a few times, and again, this is all made up, a few times when I thought, you took it too far, Anne. You needed to let it go. But it's just like those little things that Hilary Mantel adds into conversations that you're like, oh, I can kind of see why Henry doesn't want to be with her anymore. And you start like, well, maybe I'm on Team Henry, Team Cromwell. But then you remember that these are real people, and then this isn't just a story. And then you start to think, wait a minute, I don't like where this is going. So Anne Boleyn trying to have kids. It's not working out. Henry is really into Jane Seymour for whatever reason. And then he starts to feel like God is against him because, I don't know, he was also intimate with Anne's sister and possibly mother. That's a whole other level. So he starts to feel like his marriage is cursed, and he, like, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Thomas Cromwell, get me out of this marriage just like you did with the first one. Unfortunately, Thomas Cromwell is the person that made the Anne Boleyn marriage possible by doing lots of lawyering things. So in order to break apart his web of lawmaking, he has to really dig in deep, and he has to truly make Anne like this villain of a person on paper and through the eyes of not only the law, but also to just an everyday person, where you would think, well, of course she has to go. It doesn't make any sense. Also, unfortunately, Anne is not popular at all with really anybody. She is a rabble-rouser in religion, and she also reads a lot. And we know this historically. And she has a mind of her own. And that just begins to wear on Henry. And he doesn't want anything to do with it. He wants somebody who's not going to talk back to him. And he doesn't want to be in this rabble-rousing relationship anymore, especially when there is no son to be had, it seems like. So remember, it took them 7 years to get together, and she's only been queen for 3. So thanks for trying. We'll see you later, basically. So Thomas Cromwell creates this horrible person on paper. There is a trial of Anne Boleyn, which historically there is no record of. We just know that it happened, but we don't know what was said, who was there. All we know historically is that a lot of people end up losing their lives, and Anne Boleyn is beheaded, along with, again, many other people. When this book is called Bring Up the Bodies, that is what it is referring to. It is just like one after another, after another, after another, after her trial, and it is like truly, truly insane. You're reading this and you're like, I can't believe this actually happened. So the thing that you have to remember when you're reading Hilary Mantel is that all the conversations are made up. Hilary Mantel did a fantastic job of researching history and just taking real things that happened and creating conversations around it. What she thinks, her interpretation of maybe what Thomas Cromwell said to the king and maybe what Anne said to the king, and all this, just hypothesis and writing it down. And it's just so beautifully written and so well written that you start to think maybe it is reality. But we really don't know, obviously, what the conversations were between people. We only know letters from so-and-so to so-and-so, and letters from, like, other ambassadors about the situation and what's going on, and kind of verifying that way. But again, we don't know the actual conversations that are going on. So that part is so good. And you just think, well, yeah, I mean, it could have totally gone down that way. And the trial, I would say the last 100 pages of Bring Up the Bodies is really rough. It's really rough to read, but it's so good that you should read it. And it doesn't get to the point where you're like, oh, I'm feeling so uncomfortable and so awful. There are definitely uncomfortable moments. But the thing, again, the brilliancy of Hilary Mantel is that all of these crazy things that have been said about Anne, regardless of whether or not you believe it, at the end when she is walking to the headsman, you just think, don't do it. Like, grant her leniency. Like, just let her go. Even though historically we already know that she's going to lose her head. And of course it happens in the story, but it's just so good, so brilliantly written. And if you've seen the PBS special of the Wolf Hall series, it goes through Bring Up the Bodies, and that is done beautifully and so great. They did a fantastic job. It's not gory, it's not awful or anything. It's just like they did the best job that they could have done without being gross, okay? So that's kind of the synopsis and a little bit of the history side versus the Hilary Mantel side. And I think, one of the things that I found most interesting is like when Henry starts to be like, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Thomas Cromwell, get me out of this marriage. He doesn't say like, make Anne this awful person. He doesn't tell him to go as far as Thomas Cromwell does. But because Thomas Cromwell is such a brilliant lawyer, he has to do these things. It's the only way, it seems like, to get the king out of this marriage. And I've just found myself thinking, like, again, these were real people. These are real events that are happening. But I also found myself thinking, like, how are all of these brilliant men and this whole country following this king after he got rid of one wife, and now he's getting rid of another wife, and he's going to marry Jane Seymour like a week after the beheading of Anne Boleyn? It's just insane. This is a huge turning point for Henry VIII as a person. I think he really steps into power in a very negative and like wicked, evil way, and it just becomes too much. And it's like you just have so much power that no matter what you've done for him, you make one misstep and you literally lose your head. It is crazy. He signs the warrant for death for friends that he's had since childhood. It is just shocking. And I think this is a turning point for Thomas Cromwell too. In Wolf Hall, I'm cheering for him so hard. And then it just becomes a little vindictive at Bring Up the Bodies. It feels like he's really just kind of going after all the people that are in his way instead of finding out the truth. And I know that he says in the book that you pick your prince and you do right by him, and he definitely is doing everything he can for Henry. And I know that he has bigger plans, and he is historically the person that's responsible for things like the Bible being in English, and also for people recording like who was born when and who died when, and just like so many good things, taking care of women who are in need, taking care of the poor. But then he also has this awful side of dealing with the king's women that is just heartbreaking and awful. And I mean, it's shocking, and I just don't know how. I keep thinking, like, what would I have done if I was Thomas Cromwell? Like, because the alternative for him would probably be for him to lose his life. So I don't know. It's just one of those crazy real life questions where you're like, he loses his life or she loses her life, and he kind of gets the foot up this time and she loses her life, and then later on he loses his life. So it's just this giant circle of karma. It's just crazy. Even the whole Anne Boleyn getting King Henry and then Jane Seymour getting King Henry, they play the same thing. But Anne is considered this villain and Jane Seymour is considered this angel. It's just bananas. Just totally bananas. This whole historical reality is just bananas. So that is the book talk. It's an amazing book. And if you have been on this Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn journey with me, thank you so much. It has truly been a part of my life for over a year. I've been reading these stories and researching these people and watching documentaries, and it's just been so incredible to learn about all these people that I had no idea about so many things. And I hope you enjoy the books. I hope you give them a chance. I hope you watch the PBS Wolf Hall. That is fantastic. And I hope you enjoy them as much as I did. And thank you again for watching this book talk. So normally I do fashion videos every Wednesday, beauty videos on Friday, and on Mondays, tips and tricks for making your life a little bit easier. But on the first Wednesday of every month, I do a book talk. So thank you again for watching. Hit the subscribe and hit the thumbs up, and I will see you very soon. Bye.